Interesting.
certainly.
Yeah, I mean, people probably they know you've got a big farm and everything. I don't know if I've told because it's not really a story. It's pretty small, but I grew up in the suburbs, Penfield, New York, and then my wife and I was working in the city for the Catholic Church, and all of a sudden, we had 4 kids in 5 years, and we were either going to commit to the city, and I don't want to really run down the suburbs so much. My own childhood looked exactly like E.T.,
Mhm.
big wheels, packs of boys.
Yeah.
It was the best of the few movies that captured. I think the movie Super 8 captured it pretty good too, to a certain extent, Stranger Things. Um, but so we were either going to stay in the city of Rochester, and get involved in, I guess would be social justice. I have no idea. And then or the country. And so my sister, I went to SUNY Geneseo, and my sister, who was a senior when I was a freshman, she quote unquote married a townie. And so she settled out this way. And my wife, Amy, and I just thought, hey, we'll move out to the country a little bit, and settled out in Hemlock, New York, which we call the gateway to Appalachia. And we have a third of an acre. And we've invested, there was some great tall 9-foot fencing by a guy next to us, a much bigger house than ours. Let me tell you, I've raised 4 kids in a house, 1,300 square feet. And that's been a blessing right now because my kids, they knew how to fly the coop.
Uh-huh.
And my youngest now just graduated from college. And we're glad that we don't have too much house to take care of. And we've got a lot of room. We've configured it to come back. But in a third of an acre, we inherited 2 sides of the backyard, just an amazing fence built by a famous doctor who lived next to us. He was a hypochondriac. He had copper gutters, bomb shelters, and anything he invested in his house was huge. So it was his fence, and it's just great. And so, deer for us, at least on half of our backyard, no problem. Then I put up post and rail, and we were pretty good. Deer could jump it. And then just last year, we spent a couple of grand. And so to have a third of an acre just really well fenced in is is nice, right? Because deer are going to be a perennial problem. And so, but on that third of an acre, I've had dwarf goats on and off. Um, Currently, I have 8 chickens. No, I have 7 chickens. Most of them have taken their names from the show uh, Call the Midwife. So Sister Monica Joan, Nurse Jenny, and things like that. Sometimes, probably the same with you, I've had chickens where I don't name them. And these ones, I think they have names, but I don't know which name applies to it. Chicken. I've had let's see, we've had rabbits and things, and so in my garden we've got 2 peach trees, a pear tree. I've got blueberries. I have natural growing black raspberries from upstate New York.
Yep.
I've got on the back fence just Concord grapes, so many of them I can't even count them, that just grew up over that fence. And then oh, there's other fruit too, cherry tree.
Nice.
And then grow strawberries. I got a nice strawberry patch, and then just a pretty big garden around an above ground pool. But it's amazing. So a third of an acre, how much food you
Mhm.
can get. So when it's all coming in, I don't necessarily, you can't eat it all, but to get my greens some years ago, I took to juicing, not because I'm a health freak, but I didn't want to throw away like some of the kale and so forth. And now so much of my vegetable intake is in the morning, just grabbing whatever's growing in the garden, the berries and kale, and just throwing it back with some local honey. Now we have 2 beehives. We've got 2. When you order bees, do they call that a swarm? What are we ordering again? No.
Or swarm, yep. You can
Okay.
also order a nuke, which
A
is
nuke. We have 2 nukes coming for.
okay, good.
And what's a nuke then, as opposed to a
Nuke
swarm?
is
Oh,
kind of
swarming is you get it.
established colony
Okay, right.
where they might split a hive and take, it's more established, and usually with the swarm, it's just a bunch of random bees, and they stick a queen in there, hoping they get acclimated to her by the time you put them in the hive.
So a nuke is maybe, or
A
we're
nuke
upping
is
our
a better
chance.
thing to get.
Okay, yeah. And my wife, she's taken 90% of the lead on the beekeeping.
Yeah.
And I would say, and we have a daughter, our second daughter's getting married. 2 of our 4 kids are already married. Lucy's getting married in August. So I've been tasked with growing all of the flowers for the wedding.
Oh, nice.
And that's super easy. As you know, it's not very difficult. We'll save so much money by doing it that way. Because Amy, my wife, wants to decorate with a lot of flowers. But I do think I'm not one half of your level of knowledge of farming. But in these people who try to do a lot with a little bit of space, probably pretty damn good at that for the amount of space I have, what I get from it. And it looks beautiful, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and people don't realize how much food you can grow in a little bit of space.
Right.
So for instance, we have a CSA, a Community Support of Agriculture, which means people buy shares in our farm for the season.
Mhm.
And our garden might be an acre and a half, maybe not even that much. But we grow enough on that for usually 30 families
Yep. Amazing, right?
in the course of 20 weeks or so. And then we have, plus there's at the end of the season, what we do is we have one hoop house where we grow tomatoes in there during the season, and over the winter we grow greens like this year we did tatsoi, spinach, and kale, which grows, I mean, like everything else on a farm, it's rhythm. Everything really slows down around Christmas, around the solstice,
Mhm.
until about Candlemas, about St. Bridget's Day.
Sure.
And that's true not only for the growth of the plants in the hoop house, but it's also true of the chickens laying eggs,
For
right? They
sure.
don't lay. You don't get any eggs really. I mean, very few.
Let me ask you, like, if you could add, I don't have artificial lighting. When I raised chickens, it was about 40 to 60 chickens for the Abbey
Right.
of the Genesee. It wasn't beaming light, but I put 2 light bulbs on and I put them on a timer for the winter.
Right.
I haven't read into that. You can increase your production. It is, according to maybe anthroposophical farming and animal husbandry, would you always be against that, even if you could, or would you add some lighting to keep the,
Personally, I'm against it.
okay.
but,
How do you
but
articulate that opposition?
body talked me into doing it one year.
Okay.
And I said, well, you're just going to pay for it someplace else. It's not, you don't get anything for free.
Say
So
more. Where do you think you
what
pay for it?
happens, so if you do the artificial light in the winter, they run out of gas in the summer,
Okay. Yep.
right? They stop laying, or they slow down earlier because
It's very demanding on the body. Like some of
it's
these breeds
slavery.
will have
Yeah.
about 284 chickens or what the best laying. So my sense, I don't know if it's true, is like some of mine are Buff Orpingtons. And I think the number is, when you buy chickens, they might have a number that this breed is expected to lay 287 eggs in a 365-day year. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, but I mean, that kind of production model, right? Where people think in terms of production and not of health
Yeah.
animals and of what you're doing. That's a big difference between conventional and even conventional organic and biodynamic farming or gardening.
Oh, totally.
And
But do you think when like Central Tractor says these chickens, this breed could do that? Do you think that's if you press them by artificial
yeah,
lighting and things?
I mean,
Okay.
it's not
Yeah.
unlikely. Now, interesting you mentioned chickens,
Yeah.
because at this time of the year is when people will get new chickens, right?
Oh,
So
sure.
you go to the local feed stores right now, they'll have, big troughs full of chicks.
Mhm.
And we were just having a discussion about whether we wanted to buy some chicks this year or hatch some. Because I mean, now we don't have the modern breeds, most of them, it's hard to get them to brood sometimes. They don't
Right.
brood
Right.
when you want them to brood, which means set on their eggs
Mhm.
so they can hatch them. I mean, some do, some don't, but it's hard to get them to do that, and you can't predict it. And you need a brooding chamber for those broody hens to be brooding on these eggs,
Mhm.
which we don't have in our hen house. I mean, I suppose I could build one more thing though. So we decided that at least for laying hens, that will incubate some this year,
Okay.
which is it's a pretty good way to do it. So as long as you have a rooster, of course.
And an
Um,
incubator.
but if we do meat chickens, we'll probably buy some chicks. But here I found this morning
Tell me.
in the Great Compendium, or people know it, the Carmina Gaelica. Do you know this one?
I do not know it.
Songs of the Gael, right? Which was put together, I think. Does it tell you what year? In the 19th century by Alexander Carmichael, who was one of those great figures like Cecil Sharp and who else was, well, the Brothers Grimm and
Okay.
William
The
Butler
first two
Yeats.
names I had never heard of.
Well, they're
I was
all
gonna say,
people who, and so Cecil Sharp was
I think I've seen the
kind
name,
of a
but that's it.
musicologist, and he went around England and maybe Ireland and
Oh, and
Scotland,
collected the old stories.
the whole songs.
Oh, okay, wow.
He collected
The old-
all the old songs, where like the Grimm brothers in Germany were collecting the old stories,
Mhm.
and Yeats too in Ireland was collecting the old stories, right?
Hmm.
So, uh, but Alexander Carmichael, he died in 1912, was did the same thing with prayers and incantations and charms of the peasantry, right?
Mhm.
And here's one he did for a hatching blessing. Now he didn't write this; he collected it from probably some old Scottish one or something. And it says here, "I will rise early on the morning of Monday. I will sing my rune and rhyme. I will go sunwise with my cog to the nest of my hen with sure intent. I will place my left hand to my breast, my right hand to my heart. I will seek the loving wisdom of him, abundance and grace, in broods and in flocks. I will close my two eyes quickly, as in blind man's bluff, moving slowly. I will stretch my left hand over thither to the nest of my hen on yonder side." And it goes on, but it's a blessing of the eggs to hatch.
I love it. I
And,
love it.
and this book is filled with them. And there's like, you ever see the movie The Secret of Roninish?
I have. I like it a
I
lot.
love it. But remember that scene in there where the grandmother blesses the embers when she's making the fire at night,
I do. Yep.
and she mentions Mary and Saint Bridget.
Mhm.
That's the kind of stuff that this book is filled with, right?
You know what it makes me think of, Michael, is that um, young people, I don't know if it's under the umbrella called mindfulness, but young people who struggle with anxiety, I'm told by my daughter who teaches in a middle school, that if somebody's having a panic attack, and we've talked about this word so much, the real, but they're just saying like focus on a tree, focus on a chair, something that's somewhat real. But like it makes me think that prayer in that sense or blessing is just another deeper immersion into the real, right? It's like
Right.
it's a healthier uh, attentiveness, comprehensive attentiveness to the real. You know,
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, if you think about this, and I don't do it, right? They have them for blessing the cows and a blessing on milking, which we don't do,
Mhm.
but because it's not culturally inculcated into us, right? So
Mhm.
there's something that was really lost. And I'm so thankful to these scholars of the 19th and early 20th century who collected all this stuff,
Yeah.
because it would be gone,
Right. Right. Right.
be absolutely gone. And it gives us, I think, um, a model for a humane and healthy way to go about living in the world.
And I think it'll come back. Have you? And I'm thinking this is a connection. Have you ever read? I've read two or three of them, or heard of the Ringing Cedar series coming out of Russia.
No, haven't
So
heard.
I think you would find it fascinating. The premise is this guy, this kind of businessman, goes up whichever river into the Taiga, and then he encounters this kind of fairy creature, Anastasia, who kind of lives in a glade, and she's friends with bears and stuff. So it's a literary conceit, but I think a lot of people like. It seems to push into reality that you wonder: is this guy? Did he meet her? Is he making it up? But she's just one of these Rudolf Steiner people who just knows everything, right? And her vision is a neat one, but she has so. Furthermore, there's a sense that, and it spawned a movement in Russia where um, most all of their vegetables, a huge percentage just come from, these little plots. So her vision is a 5 hectare plot of land. Um, and she calls them Kin's domains, Kin's domains. But what she does, and it's a very Christian sense of a mother and father with children, like monogamous marriage.
Right.
And it's a beautiful image, even if the stories or the literary conceit is batshit crazy. I just don't know. But when you're reading these stories, they pass the smell test. For example, we've talked about bees. She says because she studies bees, and picture a Rudolf Steiner looking at bees. She'll say they hate square corners. So even if you had like our new hives that we bought, she would say put some putty in there to take the edge off those corners. And so she just sees things. But one of them is, and this is a ritual too, that if you were to plant seeds, they would be heirloom seeds, but you put them under your tongue for about 5 seconds or longer. And she says the seeds are communicating with your body's needs and so forth.
Oh,
But anyhow, it's very, very cool stuff. And I got to go back to them because I think I started reading them maybe 15 years ago. And you can get online. And so what they've also developed in Russia, and I don't know the extent to which how many there are, but if you look up ringing cedars, the first thing you're going to have to do is, like so many Marian apparitions, like how do you get the spirit of lords when you have to kind of walk through a jungle of tchotchke, all the salesmen and trinkets and so forth. This ringing cedar series was begun with marketing, like the Vladimir Megre, I think, is the author. He's selling seeds from cedar trees, I guess, and making just so much money on it. And despite that horrible commercialism, I read the stories and I still think there's so much there. But when you were talking about the blessings of these things, she has a very ritualized life. And I wonder if she's just kind of begun with tabula rasa, or this guy Megre is a businessman, but also just has these kind of gifts to see something. But I don't think it would be a waste of your time to page through them sometime.
I'll check that. I will check
Yep.
that out.
And she has all these little rituals you would do, and how you plant your herb garden in a spiral, in a circle, and exactly where you place your fruit trees. And she has a map for everybody with their 5-hectare plot. And they're saying it's creating a revolution in Russia.
Interesting.
And it's in one sense traditional meets hippie values. Like picture just Anastasia herself. They paint pictures of her. She would be the most beautiful 1960s Jesus Revolution girl you would ever meet.
Mhm.
And also the values are quite traditional. And
Yeah.
there's just very fascinating.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, so I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast. I know I've written about it, but so 30 years ago when Bonnie and I got married, and we were these kind of back to the earth. I mean, Bonnie is like the ultimate earth mother. That's why I think she just had 8 babies because she was addicted to breastfeeding.
Her and Mary Walters, who we had on the program.
Yeah.
Both,
But but so 30 years ago we were into, we were skeptical of vaccination and then doctors and the establishment, and we were anti-war, and people thought we were lefties.
Yep.
And now it's not how people don't think like that, or at least the left we see on the news or the media most of the time, that's just polar opposite of what they're like now.
Yeah.
Which is mind-blowing, isn't it mind-blowing?
Yeah.
But you mentioned 5 hectares and how fruitful and productive. There was a book, I think it came out in the 1940s.
Do you know how many 5 hectares is? I'm going to convert it into acres. How many acres is 5 hectares?
I'm not sure.
12.3 acres? No. I don't think this is. Huh.
It could be.
Because I think hers is a 5-hectare thing, but I didn't. Her establishments were not 12 acres. They were really small, really small. So I must have, maybe it's 1 hectare.
Okay, maybe. But
Yeah.
So there was this book by M.G. Keynes. If you can find it, get it. I had a copy. I don't know what happened to it. I've been looking for another one. It's called 5 Acres and Independence. And he tells you exactly what. Now I think he might rely on chemicals a little bit because it's still the 40s, but most of his approach is very sound, right? And this is also one of the probably the first gardening book I have bought was John Jevons' How to Grow More Vegetables. And we still follow the principles in that, basically, which is what we used to be called the French intensive method. Have you heard of that?
Never heard of it. Nope, never
The
heard
French
of it.
intensive method is and now it's often called bio-intensive now. So the idea is, so we have 30-inch beds, 30-inch wide beds, and however long, maybe 30 feet, usually 50. And why 30? Because you can reach the other side from one pathway. So the 30-inch beds, 15 or 18-inch paths between. But the idea with the French intensive method is to not have any space there for weeds. So if you're growing lettuce, I'm trying to remember what the spacing for lettuce is. So with lettuce, it's usually you have 3 rows going across, and they're kind of in a diamond shape where you plant them, but they're staggered. And that what happens is they get big enough and they fill in all the space. So you grow them so they're just, so the spacing is that one lettuce will be where its outermost leaves will reach the leaves of the lettuces around
yeah.
it. So that's how you grow more vegetables, right?
Mhm.
And
Now it's just second nature to you, presumably, right? You
yeah,
know, I think I've developed that with broccoli for my own self. I just get it when I'm putting them in there. Yeah,
yeah, and the other thing with that is compost, right?
right.
So, and we have not the greatest soil where we are. It's very sandy, but
Hmm.
so we built it up quite a bit with cow manure.
Yeah,
With one thing about having a cowboy, that really ups your compost game right there.
right. Yeah.
And but you know, and what happens over time, you keep building it up and building it up with the compost, and you return fertility to the soil, which is great, and
Yeah.
you have enough nutrients for those plants that are packed so closely together to all grow to full size.
Yeah.
They do.
Let me take a minute to do a little soapbox on hydrogen peroxide. You know, every college student who's known me over like 20 years would say like I have a fetish with hydrogen peroxide. And I probably do. When I feel a cold coming on, I'll put hydrogen peroxide in my ears. There's one guy. We're not claiming that it necessarily goes from your ears to your lungs, but
Yeah.
it can't do any harm. And your ears are a petri dish for all this kind of crap. Nonetheless, so I order. It's a company called, and I'm not paid by them. It's called Guardian, not Garden, but Guardian of Eden. But I get a gallon full. It comes by kind of hazmat, 35% hydrogen peroxide. So what we know, some people could say it would be acid rain or various other things, but our water probably has less oxygen. Now, again, I'm going to put a lot of things out there. I haven't done so much research. A lot of people have said when you go to Lourdes and other places, there is a paper online about a miraculous well in India, and they do test the water and they find that there's more oxygen in the water. So what is hydrogen peroxide? It's water with one extra oxygen mineral. When I was doing microgreens for the monastery, there was an old monk who they wanted him to have a project he could do. He was going through some health trials and wasn't going to be able to work like in the bread making operation. So I thought, yeah, I'm going to give it a go. So microgreens, right? These small greens grown to just a few inches. They sell for like $37 a pound or something.
It's crazy.
Yeah, but incredible nutrients in those. And so what I did to try and beat the market was, we grew radishes because they were going to have some color and some zest in them. I think it was beets. And then I did sunflowers. Sunflower seedlings are very nutritious for you. And my goal to get us market share was to take, if you went to Johnny's Seeds, you would pay, say, $7 for maybe half a pound of really good sunflower seeds. But I just bought a bag of like 3-year-old black oil sunflower seeds, 3 or 4 years old. And we know none of these were genetically modified. I soaked those seeds in hydrogen peroxide and I got a 95% germination rate.
Wow.
And the literature would say you're going to get about 30% germination rate. So we could, and they were going to be half of our weight for the microgreens, and it's super successful. So for that seed starting for people, what people need to know with gardening too, Michael, is that when we look at pests and disease, we're always talking about, it's what I call the myth of origins, the Big Bang and everything happened, or the domino theory of history. Out of our insecurity, we're looking for the thing that causes other things. So the germ theory of disease. But you would get it being a farmer. But once we realize that disease plants invite germs and pests as much as like pests are drawn to plants, you start to realize that when early seedlings are coming up, I'll often, if they look a little unhealthy or things are attacking them, I just add a little hydrogen peroxide to the water, and it's miraculous. We know that Swiss animal husbandry, like cattle farmers and so forth, they're now using hydrogen peroxide, so they never have to use a dewormer.
Nice.
Yep. But just go online, just buy your 3% brown bottle at the pharmacy store, and people, you can take last year's seeds if you want to save money, and soak them in whatever it says online, overnight, some water with hydrogen peroxide in there, and you're going to get a germination rate and a seed starter that's just it'll blow your mind. It'll blow your mind.
Yeah,
Yep,
I
yep.
hadn't heard that.
Yep.
So yeah, and the thing is, though, I mean, we're talking about disease and insects and problems that people have in their gardens. The biggest problem I have noticed with people, fledgling gardeners, is nobody looks up.
Say it again. What? Nobody what?
Nobody looks up. because they don't take into account how much sun you need to grow plants.
Yeah, right.
They just don't. I've talked to people, and they said, "Well, I'm trying to garden, and it's not working out." I said, "Well, how much sun do you get?" "I don't know, about 3 hours." That's why.
Yeah, you're gonna get every mold, every bug.
Some things don't like 12 hours of hot sun, for instance, like lettuce, and lettuce does not do well in the middle of summer,
Right.
in the heat of summer. But that's what lettuce is, a cool season crop. But in general, people don't pay attention to how much sun they need, or they plant underneath a maple tree, which is a top feeder, so it sucks all the nutrients before the plants can get to it, and they don't know what's going on. So that just much of it is just very simple and basic that we don't pay attention to.
Right.
And I think the two simple things are the soil and the sun.
Hmm.
Right? And if you don't nurture the soil, it doesn't matter how much sun you have.
Hmm.
But if you don't have enough sun, it doesn't matter how much you nurture the soil either.
100%.
It just
And again, if
doesn't.
you have less sun, it's sad because you have to, I would say, plant your plants even sadly a little further apart, because without the sun kind of drying those leaves and things, you get them too close, even like your diamond method. I find they're more prone to just start picking up little molds and things.
Well, they will, but the thing is, I mean, it's just because it's in a bad situation.
Hmm.
So it's already sick. It's already, well, I shouldn't say that. It's not, it's a good place for plants to grow, just not vegetables,
Right.
right? Not things, it's not going to be helpful for that. So that's why
Mhm.
you see, in different ecosystems, that, micro environments, different kinds of flora grow in different places for a reason, right?
Mhm.
You know, we often, I'll throw down buckwheat or rape or something where we move the fence for our chicken coop. And so that stuff will grow up, and then when it gets big enough, I'll move the fence back to where it was so the chickens can eat that and move it back. So and you'll notice a lot of times people might wonder why so many farm fresh eggs have such orange yolks.
Mhm.
Well, it's from the beta carotene, right? It's from the
Oh, I
grass.
didn't know that. I know, again, isn't it becoming more and more by the year? Like, if you put a store-bought egg in a frying pan, some people find it hard to eat a brown egg, let's be honest. Then they see that these yellow yolks, and it can disgust them. But it's just like 2 weeks having like your own eggs, and you look at the yolks in a frying pan. It's just like all gelatinous, and it slides the whole course of the egg, right? It's not held in the center of the egg at all, and that pink color just starts to look repulsively diseased.
Yeah, it does. It's not healthy. It's dead food.
And now they're costing people about $10 what is it? I don't even know what eggs are. Organic eggs in Wegmans, where we are, a dozen organic eggs, I think, are $11.50.
Yeah, they really.
Yep.
I haven't checked around here. I think it's at least $8.
Yeah,
We charge 5. We
that's
charge
good.
5, but we right
Probably
now.
2 years ago, you were charging $3, weren't you, or no?
Nah, I think the
Then you
lowest
could
we've
be
been.
charging 8,
We
my
were at
friend, because the
4.
price of eggs is way up.
We were at 4 for a while there.
Okay.
We're at 5 now. We should probably go higher because feed isn't getting any cheaper.
The nitrogen piece, right?
And well, plus it's nice. I mean, I don't know about you. Our guys get a lot. Our girls, I correct myself, get a lot of scraps from the kitchen at this time of the year.
Yep. And
And
I started growing last year for chickens too, which is comfree,
oh yeah,
that chickens, they love it. They love it. So I
they
mix it
do.
with their grass
They do
clippings.
cows, they do
Yep,
goats. It's
yep.
great stuff. The other thing which people don't know with chickens, and it might alarm some of our listeners, but they like meat.
Yeah, yep.
They like meat. So
They also like their own eggs.
a few weeks ago, I was butchering a deer, for instance, and I had all these scraps, or actually, it was a couple of bones that still had some meat on them. I gave one to my dog, of course, and I gave the shoulder blade to the chickens, because especially at this time of year, there are no insects for them to eat.
Right.
They're not getting protein, and they need protein, and it's an old farmer trick. The farmers used to like throw a dead squirrel into the hen yard
Hmm.
in the winter so they got enough protein. Plus, they
Okay.
won't. If they get enough protein, they don't pick on each other and they don't start eating eggs
Yeah.
because they do eat eggs upon occasion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've never had a flock where there wasn't like an egg breaker, and it can take a while to cure them of it. And again, what I didn't realize is maybe again they're just searching for the protein they're not getting enough of even in the feed in the winter.
It's part of it, yeah.
Yep.
And so, but the idea, right, is to living in harmony with nature in some way, or trying to establish some kind of balance with your relationship to that night, and you realize, that there's a lot to it. I mean, we've had problems with possums, for instance, in the winter. Not as bad this year as in other years, but yesterday I went. So my job, one of my jobs in the evening, is to make sure that the cows have water in the barn,
Hmm.
and I bring the cows in. And when I went, went into the barn, we have a cat. We have a barn cat, Doug, and
Good name for a barn cat.
I always feed Doug when I go out in the evening. And so I fed Doug, and I'm getting the cows situated, and then I turn around, and heading for Doug's bowl is a skunk.
Wow.
Like, oh god. And I know where it lives. It's probably had babies. But it's living. There's a pile of wood in part of our barn, like
Uh-huh.
lumber that it's spare lumber that I'll use for stuff. I
Yeah.
guess I'm going to that pile this week.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
but I come in the house, I said, well, so there's a skunk right where we milk. And what are you gonna do? I said, I don't
Yeah.
know. He'll probably move away eventually.
Tricky sometimes, right?
Yeah.
What's been your biggest massacre? At the monastery, uh, again, there was a lot of chickens in one Memorial Day weekend. I think nobody else was really. I'd loaded the feeder up and everything, so it was a 3-day holiday. But a weasel started getting in. And a weasel, they're weaselly for sure, and they got such a high metabolism that they'll savagely kill a chicken just to eat a little bit, and then they're full. But they're outrunning so much that they're going to come back. So it was a massacre of about 3/4 of the flock, and then I became fascinated with weasels, or it could have been a mink, and I think shortly before COVID, when the retreat house is closed, um, I was moving some wood in the barn, and it was a coop inside a barn that kind of led outside. And there, when you make eye contact with certain animals, like these friends you've had for a long time, and I was just moving something, and this weasel that had killed everything was just looking at me, and we just held eye contact for at least 5 minutes. He stared at me, and I stared at him, and it
Really?
was beautiful and magical. But also, I just thought, how can I kill this thing that's killing all the chickens?
Yeah.
Because then they are so good at finding their way in,
Oh, they are.
and they're killing machines, right? And they can climb. Um,
We haven't had any weasel problems here, but where we used to
okay,
live, we were, we could, I mean, I don't think I've seen them. Um, we had problems with mink before.
okay, same family,
Yeah, same
vicious.
family.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
weasel, yeah. So they can be vicious, and there was a weasel or a mink that killed a bunch of chickens one time.
Mhm.
Um, but generally, the worst it's ever been is last year with possums.
Okay.
We
Killing
couldn't.
chickens or just messing with stuff?
Well, they eat stuff. They eat the eggs. They
Okay,
call
right.
and they're
Yeah.
so damn slow too, right?
Yep.
So, and I knew something. And the thing is, you can tell. I don't know if you can tell something's not right, not just with
Mhm.
something's around here, right?
Oh yeah.
But you don't know what it is. And I knew something was in the barn. I thought it was probably a raccoon, but nope, it's a skunk.
Okay. Yeah.
There's not a lot of skunks around here either, so it's rare to have skunks, but they're around.
What advice would you give to? I don't think many of our listeners. I'm guessing very few listeners would have more acres than you, or a bigger farming operation than you do. So let's talk about people who, have just started gardening a little bit and want to get deeper into it, or people who are still thinking about doing their first garden. You give some of your advice, I'll give some of my advice.
Well, the sun and soil is the first piece of advice. I
Okay.
also recommend, well, if it's the first year, don't try to do too much. People try to do too
Mhm.
much and get overwhelmed. Um, one step at a time. Slow and steady wins the race, right?
Mhm.
So, and I do highly recommend the 30-inch bed, wide bed. It's a
Okay.
wonderful thing. Um,
How high do you raise the bed?
I don't raise them. I mean, I raise
Okay.
them. We do no-till gardening.
Yeah. Yep.
Means we don't use a plow. We do. I mean, I'll use rototiller if I'm cutting new sod, which there are good things and bad things about that. The good thing
Mhm.
is it's quick. The bad thing
Yep.
is you dig up all the old weed seeds.
Mhm.
So you rototill once, it'll take a couple of years, 2 or 3 years to get that bed in where you want it.
Mhm.
But so after I do that, so I form the beds and what you do is you rake out from where the pathway will be from opposite
Right.
ends.
Right. Yep.
And
That's
the
essentially
bed,
what I do
might
too.
go up 6 or 8 inches and then add compost on top of that. But what we do, the really magical thing, which I highly recommend, is getting a broad fork,
Okay.
which is a kind of it's like a garden fork, right? But it's 20 inches wide or 27 inches wide. And it's got long teeth about 18 inches, about a foot long. And you use that to loosen the soil up. And I'm sure you can find videos on how to use a broad fork if you don't know how to do it. But it's really useful and really helps with the capillary action of the soil
Mhm.
and fights compaction. And so, and then that's the only tools. Maybe we'll hoe, but that's about the only tool we use on our beds once they're established. And it's
Mhm.
only to keep it from giving in too much to gravity,
Mhm.
to compacting and sinking in.
The street that runs right behind my house is called Clay Street. I can't describe how clayey my soil is. There's some parts of my yard, and I've just worked it so much. I never had a huge truck come in, but years and years of compost leaves, really in the fall, just getting the grass leaf mixture and so forth. And it's pretty good, but compaction is such a problem that no-till can be tricky for me because it's really going to compress a lot. I I should probably get a broad fork. I've worried the clay soil is so heavy that I've done so much with just spading and turning over. And
It's easier than spading and turning over too. That's the other thing.
but is the broad fork, is that going to be, are the tines strong enough, or am I going to bend them?
Oh yeah.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They're strong. And what's good about that is and the other thing we
Talk
try
to
not.
about. I just got to run real quick first.
I feel I'm so alone right now. The other thing is, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about Mike. He won't know until he sees the tape. He's a pretty good guy, but anyway, yeah. So the idea with using a broad fork is that way you're not disturbing the levels of the soil because you want the richest soil on the top, and it eventually works its way down. And if you don't, like Mike was talking about, flipping the soil or doing that every year, you do that every year. It's like rototilling, and you just a lot of times what you do is you dig up weed seeds, and it's like you start over from scratch every year. So that's why our recommendation is to not flip the soil. I mean, you can flip sod when you're first starting gardening. You want to flip sod, that can be useful, but it's going to come back. It takes a couple of years to get sod under control. And it depends on, especially we have quack grass here, which is a pain, and it drives me insane. But you just have to come to terms. Yeah, and you have to know your soil. You have to know your microclimate, and you have to know your soil. I just talk smack about you, but
Oh yeah. I was talk about nature. Nature called for the first time since we've done this podcast. Nature beckoned to me in a way that hadn't.
he's been holding it since May of last year, people. So yeah, and there's so many there's so much that goes into farming and gardening, but you don't think about it.
Yeah.
But it's a great.
But on the other hand, don't you think, and not to interrupt you, on the other hand, it's just like, I don't know why this analogy came to me, but like working for the Catholic Church, you're training altar servers. And I tell them, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, but you also remind them it's just like setting and cleaning the table, right? You're setting the table and clearing the table. So gardening, I would tell people in a similar way. the reason we love it, it's infinitely deep, it's heartbreaking, but it's also kind of like throwing a seed in the soil and trying to nurture it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the thing is, I was just reading today. Actually, it was an article, which I never read the articles in the Stella Natura calendar, the biodynamic gardening calendar. But I just
Uh-huh.
had it was Bonnie was looking at it for something, and I was reading this article, which was about vegetarianism versus biodynamic farming, because in a way, the article was arguing that some people who are vegans or kind of like extreme vegetarians, think they're not involved in death, in the death of animals and stuff. But
What's the line from Chesterton?
I don't know.
The silent scream of the animal kingdom and the green blood of the green blood of the vegetable kingdom. So he
Yeah,
wants to, life feeds off of life. So he talks about like,
that's it.
crushing a piece of celery and the green blood that oozes out. Yeah.
And that's why you see people like Bill Gates, for instance, who's trying to get everybody to get rid of their cows. Bonnie's pissed, and she keeps posting pictures of cows on social media,
Uh-huh.
because, as we know, he doesn't know because he's not a farmer. But as anybody could tell you, without, and this is in biodynamic farming, a big, major, important principle, that without animals, you don't have healthy plants,
Right.
and vice versa, right? That's why it's a closed system, right? That's what's important about it. And I shouldn't say the one thing, but one thing I have learned from being a farmer or gardener for 30 years or more is that you're invested and you're participating in the cycle of life.
Mm-hmm.
And you see how sacred it is, right?
Yep.
Because people think, so in May, for instance, we'll be taking our steer to slaughter, and it'll come back in nice bags. But we love that cow. We love that guy.
Mm-hmm.
But he's had a good life. He was giving me a little trouble this morning, but he's had a good life, and we have had a good life with him. But we're all part of this cycle. And I think the animal kingdom in this way, I mean, if you treat them with reverence, first of all,
big time,
and not as a thing, as an expression of ideology, and don't anthropomorphize them, because they're not. I mean, they're still animals. And I knew when we had pigs, that if I would have collapsed in the pig yard, no one would be able to find me, because the pigs would have eaten me before the day was over, right?
The word is
I
the
like the
mafia is
pigs.
very aware of that.
I love them, but that's how it is.
Mhm.
But there is a sacredness in being connected to the cycle of birth and death.
Yeah.
Right. And I think
go ahead. Yeah.
I think our culture hates both, hates fertility and hates death.
Yep.
So
Yep.
People try to to push it to the margins. And if you own your relationship in this thing called life, you're in the middle of it. There is a sacredness that comes with it. And I grew up in the city like you, Mike, and you don't have that gratitude for the things on your plate,
Mm-hmm.
if you're so distanced from where it comes from, right?
Right. I have mad respect for vegetarians. Our friend Guido, I think, is 99% vegetarian, but I think he would agree with us too, that for me, the issue of scale is much more important than, they say, like, in agribusiness, let's say you're a vegetarian and you got your vegetables from, an industrial farmer, they say the number of field mice, chopped up in the combines, So again, the whole point, again, Chesterton saw it. Life feeds off of other life. As a Christian, that seems to be maybe one of the main storylines. At the Book of Revelation, something went wrong at dinner in the Garden of Eden, and then you traverse the whole narrative of the Bible, and you find yourself looking at the Lamb kind of making eye contact with it as you kind of slit its throat, right? And you're saying thank you, and this is Eucharist, folks. But there's nothing. I was talking to a member of parish council. He might be listening to this last night. And we're talking about, I think it fell along the conservative liberal thing, but of course we're involved in violence in some way. Sure, I guess so. But and it went into eating and vegetarianism and so forth. But you can be a meat eater and be a bigger foe of industrial, animal husbandry. And
Oh,
again,
yeah.
like you can be a meat eater and know that like we should never ever treat animals horribly in the industry. There's sacred ways of killing. There's not sacred ways of killing, but we have to flesh this issue out, because where we both agree is that if you think going vegetarian is removing you from the mystery of our existence on this planet, you're out to lunch. Now, if you think eating lower on the food chain is healthier, I think you're probably right.
I don't know if that's right. I was a vegetarian for 12 years. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's
No, I mean, lower on the food chain, not meaning purely vegetarian. Like I don't know if it's the food pyramid or the thing, but yeah, I try and get a lot of vegetables, and I try to minimize too much red meat and things.
Yeah, we do a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. Are you there?
Hold on a second.
Oh, okay. You're looking for something. Yeah. So I guess I was thinking again of like, it came up several times this week with students and so forth, like the animal rights piece. And I heard on the news yesterday that some sheep escaped from a slaughterhouse in like New Jersey or Connecticut. I think it was a national news story. And I couldn't listen to it. For some reason, I found it captivating, because the police who had to round them up were saying there's no way in hell that these things are getting returned to the slaughterhouse. But I don't think that they were speaking from a position that eating meat is wrong. I just wonder, and maybe a listener would know, it seemed to be that like there is some convention maybe in the world that if animals escape from the slaughterhouse, they don't have to get returned, almost like the pardon of the turkey. But I wanted to spend some time looking up that story today, because these were just regular police officers, and they wouldn't strike you from like a downtown area as people who cared so much that like nobody would ever kill an animal to eat, but yet they were going to defend these sheep from ever going back there.
Well,
And I just wondered if it was like some poetry to it.
well, that's what happened. Now, this deer I butchered last month, what happened is our chiropractor ran into it with his plow.
Okay.
And he felt terrible. I mean, he went and ran into the house to get a gun to shoot it to keep it from suffering anymore, right?
Yep.
Both front legs. And in the meantime, the state police had come there and they killed it because they didn't want to see it suffer either, right?
Sure.
But what I think is important, though, I mean, here I'm going to go back to the Carmina de Gadelica. Here's a herding blessing. Traveling moorland, traveling townland, traveling mossland long and wide, be the herding of God the Son about your feet. Safe and whole may you return home. Be the herding of God the Son about your feet. Safe and whole may you return home. The sanctuary of Karmak and of Columba be protecting you going and coming, and of the milkmaiden of the soft palms, bride of the clustering hair golden brown, and of the milkmaid of the soft palms, bride of the clustering hair golden brown. So intentionality means everything, right?
Yeah, right.
And the disposition towards that which you're encountering. I mean, Native Americans, right? When they would, and they still do, but when they would shoot a deer, for instance, the first thing you do is thank the animal for giving up.
The whole culture is filled with thanking it. You're thanking the tree that gives you the,
right.
Or even in ancient Hindu culture, the milk blessing and so forth. Yeah, more and more of this, folks. More and more of this.
I wrote about this in Sophia in Exile. I mean, a few years ago, I was in my deer blind, and this buck came out. It was like it was mystical the way he came out of the swamp. It just presented himself to me. And I remember talking to Reese Schroeder-Sheeker about it later that day. She said, Michael, Native American people I know say you don't kill a buck gives itself to you.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. Which is true. I mean, and I think this goes back to what we were talking with last week with James Tunney, right? When he's talking about how the fairies must have gotten mad at him for spilling too much of the beans and made his bathtub overflow.
Yeah.
And they were making my keys disappear at scale. for about a week. But nature knows when you're thankful and when you've said too much, and when
Yeah.
you know what I mean, it's that presence to the invisible kingdom and the visible kingdom, where you realize that, and this goes back to farming and gardening, right? You realize when you're in that garden or you're in the forest, and you're not alone, and it doesn't mean you're in the company of just animals and stuff either,
Mhm.
and plants. There's something else going on in that.
Totally and unmitigatedly, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Like, reason enough, and you have to tell people it's like, reason enough to get into gardening. James Tunney also mentioned like earthing, right? Just to have your feet connect to soil, and what that can do. We know he's right, but again, on my little third of an acre, only which of less than a fourth do I have the big garden, and the trees are in different places, and there's still plenty of room. My youngest son had a lacrosse goal, disc golf things going back there, but yeah, I mean, what would you do without those moments in the garden where you're just there and you feel like you're surrounded by the whole kingdom, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and it can be right after a period of frustration, and you're just out there and you had to be problem solving for a while. Then your brain, let's say you solved the problem, you just kind of gave up. Your brain kind of like detensions, and you have this kind of dilated awareness, and there's so much coming in. And it can be on a sunny day, it can be on a really crappy day. You can be in the mud, you can be in just like really dry, loamy soil,
Right.
And so everybody should have some connection with the land. And I say that again, thinking of the anxiety epidemic going on. There's strength that comes to you that, when you're out there, something is giving you sanity, serenity. Um,
Right.
and again, let's visit for a little bit that the frustration piece is real. I always tell people who are going to take the next step into gardening to think that this year they would want to save on their food budget, right? So stage one is you have a couple of people grow tomatoes and basil and maybe cucumbers. Stage two is playing a little bit more. Then all of a sudden somebody, and maybe they haven't played with stage one or two, but they want this thing to be real. And all I can say is even with YouTube, where everything is there, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's going to break your heart a million ways
Yeah.
and backwards. When you have all these broccoli plants and you just didn't watch the YouTube video on the cabbage sloper, and they have these white little seeds in the bottom and you didn't see them. And then all of a sudden they go right to the heart of the broccoli
Yeah.
fruit. Yep.
Well, it happened in 2020. 2020 was a bad year on the
Uh-huh.
farm. And it was bad because we had late frost and we had super early frost.
Mhm.
So we had frost on September 19th, which is unheard of.
Way too early. Yep.
Way too early. And it was a hard frost too. It wasn't just a little bit of frost. It was, it got down to 27 degrees or something,
Mhm.
and killed half the garden.
Yep.
Didn't
Yep.
kill the
Yep.
kale and stuff like that, but it killed all the tomatoes, killed the peppers, killed the squash. It was a disaster. But and like you said, it's heartbreaking. But that's part of the gig, right?
Yep. Yep.
And it's part of, it's like, talk about a mirror of life, right?
100%.
Yeah. I mean,
Yep.
you're participating in the creation, and that's part of it, right?
Yeah. So we encourage people to, I'm going to have to run in a little bit for a meeting, but we certainly encourage people to, and it takes some money to get involved too. I think people think gardening, it's food for free. In one sense it is, but, and it's not as simple as saying you got to spend money to make money, but here in upstate New York, depending on where you are, more in the village where I am than where I work than the country
Right.
where I live. You do need, the deer are so aggressive here because there's not as much food. Essentially, before you would get into gardening, I would tell people, I don't know, find $1,500 and you need a 9-foot fence or 2 6-foot fence. So that otherwise that heartbreak is for sure. When you fall in love, you're risking heartbreak, but the heartbreak of not having a fence is for sure.
That's right. And the other thing is, this is a very simple thing. Don't skimp on tools.
Right.
So people buy like really cheap spade or fork from the hardware store, or a rake, and this happens to me with rakes all the time, and they break almost right away.
Yep.
Right. So you put some money into a decent tool. I still, the spade and fork I've had them for 30 years.
Do you ever sharpen your spade?
Not so much. I do, um, if I have to like cut tree roots or stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm
Other
thinking
than
about
that,
doing it because there's a guy, he writes, he's a guy from down under, but he writes this book called The Intelligent Gardener, and there's another one. I forget his name. Really excellent books. But he knew he wanted to garden for money, and he was spending money to bring in really great topsoil and so forth. But one of his things, and specifically because I have this super clayey soil, that he says it's amazing when you sharpen a spade how easy it is to just. And
oh, for
I've
you,
never
yeah.
done it.
We
I've
don't
never
need,
done it.
our soil is so sandy here, it's not
You're
necessary.
actually in the Midwest.
Yeah, but when I was doing landscaping with that spade,
Mhm.
digging up bushes or something like that, or root pruning trees, then I would sharpen it. But I
But
have,
how much does a good spade cost then? So I don't think I have the cheapest.
well, mine, so 30 years ago, the one I bought was $110.
Okay, so you do have to spend money on that. Yeah,
Yeah, but it's solid, man. It's a real work of art.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'll buy a good one this year because the one I've been using for the last couple of years is getting flimsy, a little bit rusty and things. And when I invest this year, maybe I'll just throw some money at it.
It's worth it. It's worth it.
Yep, yep. No, you do. You have to make the investments. I do find, I don't know, like this indoor seed starting thing. I tend not to do tomatoes myself. I find if I'm going to do 60 tomato plants, I'm just as happy buying, um, the uh, certain types of rots are very endemic for the clay soil around here, and I get those species that are going to be good. But I certainly start all of my flowers, all of my kale, everything else I start inside. Broccoli, some years I do because you have to start it so early and they get kind of spindly. I have more and more artificial lights. Um, Up here in New York, more and more people are going to be growing pot, because it's legalized and so forth. Um, and but anyhow, uh, again, like I think we both encourage people to if they haven't done it before, make that journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so thanks everybody for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. Michael and I thought we'd visit this gardening theme a couple times, maybe not for a whole show, but visit it throughout the growing season. If anybody's going to take the plunge this year. What are you doing this weekend? I'm actually going to be trimming. I'm not crazy. I'm trimming some more Concord grapes. They're wild. They overgrow, and I don't think we're looking for a really, really deep freeze. So leaving some exposed things is fine. Same thing with my natural, like local up here, wild black raspberries. I'll start whacking those down even this time of year. I can do the same thing with peaches. Less so peaches, I'm sorry, like my pear tree. I'll take the branches now. And so when they really start growing, I've already cut off where it's going to dangle and hit the ground and things. So there's something you can be doing almost every month.
Yeah. Main thing I'm doing right now is trying to lay up enough firewood for next season, next
Yeah, you
year.
mentioned, yeah.
But so just speaking of grapes and fruit trees, just last week, I think it was earlier this week, I pruned my fruit trees. And before that, like the week before that, I took some cuttings from the grapes so I can start another line of grapes.
Oh, cool.
And actually I have ordered, get this is kind of cool. I ordered some pawpaw trees from a local
Really?
conservation district.
Mm-hmm.
Which have you ever had pawpaws?
No. Yeah, well, in the South, I think.
They call them Michigan bananas because it's like
Okay.
basically it looks like kind of like a small mango and it tastes like a banana. It grows in Michigan.
Very cool.
I ordered some of those, and I also ordered, but from someplace far away, a quince and a medlar.
I had quince when I was growing up. Okay.
Quince, I had one actually. We had this little garden. Actually, speaking of landscaping, we had this little garden. Well, it was a big little garden in Oak Park, Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
which I made like a potager. It was definitely a landscaper's garden because it was like a knot garden, very much.
Mm-hmm.
And I had espaliered apple trees as the fence around it. But at that time I had a little quince tree, but the quinces were like bowling balls. They were huge.
Yeah,
and they were
right.
delicious.
Huh.
And a medlar, do you know what a medlar is?
No, I don't.
A medlar is a weird thing. Shakespeare mentions it in his plays, and I don't know what it looks like. It looks kind of like a brown persimmon. It's just a
Okay.
weird looking thing, but it's rare. They're hard to find in Michigan. I had one. I had a little one at one time. I ordered another one this year because I would love to have it. Those things growing here. Really miss having quinces.
Uh-huh. I might try quince this year. Yeah, I don't think it might taking, Amy and I, we took down a big pine tree, so we'll be buying some. When we take down a tree, we try and throw something productive in. Our friend Tara Theek, it's just so great. I think before the first time I talked to her, maybe on the first time we had her on the podcast, we had some correspondence, but she had just finished a Genius Twitter thread. And to say Genius Twitter thread is to say Tara just did something on Twitter. She's so good.
Yeah, no kidding.
But it was on the Bradford pear, right? It's a decorative pear tree that's everywhere. It's ubiquitous in the Northeast, but it doesn't produce shit for pear. Excuse my language.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when a tree comes down, then we try, and I'm not, again, beauty. You both, I always have so many flowers, and I don't always look at my flowers as like pollinators or anything. I just like them because they're pretty. And so I don't want to put an emphasis on everything has to be practical. But sometimes when we have an ornamental bush, if we can put up a blueberry bush or something, that's what we're about lately. Yeah. So I do have to run, and we thank everybody for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. Have a great weekend, Michael.
You too.
Yep. And we'll see everybody next week. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.